Hello everyone, Psycho Dude Horror here, and today we are back with My Tiny Town Just Got Put on Lockdown Part 2, or Chapter 2. Again, it's by, Cryptic Nightmares on Reddit. Link will be in the description. Also, go check out the book on Amazon. There are two books. My Tiny Town Just Got Put on Lockdown, the one we are reading currently, and the book My Tiny Town Just Got Put on Lockdown, Searching for a Way Out. If you guys do enjoy, then please consider leaving a like and subscribing. And the Amazon link to both books will be in the description below. So with that out of the way, let's get to the story. Day 10. So, I'm no meteorologist, but does fog usually linger like this for days on end? It's been a full week since the fog rolled into the inner parts of our town, and nearly a week and a half since our town was put on lockdown. I feel like that's way beyond time that someone should be coming up with some sort of plan to fix whatever's going on around here. So, today I woke up the same as always, with our daughters running in, exclaiming what they wanted for breakfast. "Daddy, I want waffles!" As I walked downstairs to throw some waffles in the toaster, I glanced around outside and noticed the now familiar shimmering purple fog outside, almost completely unchanged over the past week. The past week has remained pretty much uneventful, other than a few random screams and flaming rodent spiders randomly running past our house. Twice since the first time have we seen a person screaming as they chased one of the animals past our house. However, those two weren't engulfed in flames like the first one. The other day, Grace was looking out the window as one of the flaming spider creatures stopped and sat in our yard. As she gazed at it, she suddenly screamed as they locked eyes at the rush of horrific visions in her mind. She collapsed after a few seconds, breaking eye contact and stopping the flood of images. Moments later, she described to me what she saw as the girls played in the other room. Dark red blood-stained walls surrounding insane medieval-style torture devices, battered and beaten, virtually destroyed bodies of screaming victims strapped to devices being whipped and tortured. Dark clouds surrounding distant, malevolent mountains made of dead and decimated bodies. Horrific scenes of people having heads and limbs brutally ripped from their bodies. Countless of other hellish fractions of time all flashed past in just a few seconds of eye contact she had with the creature. She then looked at me with a look on her face, saying that she understood what had happened to me the first time when it was I who met eyes with the creature. At that moment, we both realized that we needed to avoid looking at them whenever they came around to prevent any of that paralyzing mental assault from happening again. Day 15. Today was the first time we saw what really lurks in the fog. It came midday. I was staring out the window into the fog, as Grace and the girls played quietly in the toy room. I noticed it first because our dog in unison let out quiet woofs, and then both retreated upstairs scared, which in retrospect seemed very odd behavior for them, at least for May anyway, whom is typically fearless while Bodhi is more of a coward. After I looked back, watching the dogs leave the room, I returned my gaze to the fog outside the window, watching its pearlescent swirl vibrant colors through the rest of the dismal gray we had grown so accustomed to over the 2 weeks. As I watched out into the gray, a pale form took shape approaching the house. As it began to come into view, I looked back, whispering to Grace, "Grace, very quietly, take the girls upstairs, and please be as silent as you can. There is something coming by the house." "What is it?" she replied as she picked up Izzy and began to herd Addie quietly up the steps. "I don't know, but it doesn't look good. Please try to stay quiet. I'll be right behind you," I whispered, watching her and the girls disappear up the steps quietly. As I turned back around, the creature had made it halfway into the yard before it paused. I hid to the edge of the window, keeping my eyes on the creature. trying to learn as much as I could about this new being. Covered in smooth, paled skin, way pulled tight over its unusually placed muscles. Almost humanoid, yet crouched and walking on all fours. Thin, extensively long forearms attached to shorter, overly muscular shoulders and upper arms. Hands confusingly narrow with 6 spindly digits spouting from both ends. Tipped with long talon-like claws, 3 of the fingers were longer, protruding from the front, and 3 were shorter, spouting from the back, like they were a chameleon. A neck long but thin, holding a nearly fearless, elongated head. The shape was nearly a perfect oval. There was no mouth, but there were 3 2-inch vertical slits where I could only assume function as its nose. It only looked like a large, snow-white, lidless eyes. 4 horns shot from the top of its skull. 2 larger, thick, dark-ridged horns in nearly an S shape came from the very top, the frighteningly sharp at the tips. The last 2 were further back on its skull, much thinner, with a slow arc away from its skull. Starting from the base of it, its neck traveled down along the sides of its spine were thin, black, sharp splines. Its chest, again overly muscular, attached to an impossibly thin waist. The legs jointed more like a dog's, but again muscular and bulky at the thighs, attached to a longer, thin lower leg, and feet nearly identical to its hands, yet the only difference being that the talons on the feet looked slightly similar. As I sat there watching the creature, I noticed that it moved with very deliberate yet jerky movements, methodical, as if it were searching for something or hunting. Even with no mouth, I could hear it making clicking noise as it swept its head around. Just as I thought to turn or retreat up the steps, the creature jerked its head, focused on something in the distance. From its ribcage, 4 slits opened like a shark's gill, and it let out a guttural screech that stabbed pain into my ears and piercing my brain with horrendous torment. Yet I couldn't move to cover them for fear that the creature would notice me. If I moved at the edge of the window, it surely would see me. Only after a few seconds, the sound of the creature caused me to feel like I was going to pass out. Then the sound ceased, and the creature yelled a purple-gray cloud from its gills and then bounced away from the house at an insane pace, disappearing from the fog. The second it was no longer in view, I held my hands up to my ears, winced in pain, before I turned to run upstairs to tell Grace what I had seen. That night we gathered everyone in our bedroom to sleep and grabbed all forms of weapons we could find in our house. Sadly, nothing I kept around the house would be that effective. We had kitchen knives, we had duct tape to dowel rods, 1 baseball bat, and a young adult bow with no arrows. The girls had no trouble as well as the dogs, but for Grace and I, it was a very sleepless night. We lied awake, whispering back and forth, trying to concoct a plan, knowing that we had very limited options, not being able to leave the town, and now not knowing how many of those creatures there are that are out there. And if there are others we haven't seen yet, our food supply is starting to dwindle. We probably have enough food for maybe half a week, but we may need to venture outside the house to see what we can find. I wonder how others are doing in the town. I wish we were friends with, or at least talked to, our neighbors more. This chapter was very short, so I will be reading chapter 3 as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed. The second chapter, and we are about to start the third chapter, so let's get right into it. Day 17. It's been 2 days since we first saw the creature. We've seen them wandering past our house a time or two since, and we have hidden each time we noticed them, but we have no new contact with our neighbors, and as our food continues to grow low, we decided that I'm going to cross our backyard and either talk to our neighbor or search their house for supplies. After what seemed like hours, yet only being about a minute or two staring out into the fog from the back door, just looking and waiting for any movement, any noises. Nothing came, signaling that it was safe as it could be for me to venture out into the fog. My journey wasn't going to be very far out the door, down the back porch steps, maybe 30 yards to our privacy fence, then another 20 yards maybe to get to my neighbor's porch and back door. It was the best route I could think of, that the one that had the most cover as well as the shortest distance. Holding a dowel rod in my hand with the biggest kitchen knife taped to the end as my only form of protection, I turned the knob. As quickly as I started my trip for supplies, crouching and moving swiftly, I made it to the fence. As I began to climb the fence, all I could think was, I really wish I had installed a much sturdier fence. I dropped down on the other side clumsily with a thud. Not quite the agile ninja I once was in my early 20s. Kids, busy schedules, and general apathy had taken a toll on my body, and as I made my way into my early 30s, crouched down next to my neighbor's back door, whisper yelling, trying to avoid knocking for a fear of making too much noise. "Eric, you in there?" No answer. "Hey, if you don't answer me, I'm coming in. Eric, you home?" Still no answer. Becoming very impatient with good reasons, knowing those things were still lurking out about, I slowly turned the knob. Locked. "Shit," I exclaimed under my breath, not wanting to break any glass or try to kick the door in for fear of causing too much noise. Suddenly, I remembered that they had a door leading directly down to their basement, so they could access the pool pump and filters. The only way I knew about this fact was that Grace and I looked at the house when it was on the market, along with the quite other few houses in town before we found ours and finally made our decision. I crept down off the porch quietly over to the basement. I crept down off the porch and quietly over to the basement door as I tried the handle. The knob turned and the door swung open into the house. Success. Not sure why, but at that moment, instead of going into the house, I left the door cracked open and decided to check the garage first. I snuck over to the garage door, and to my surprise, the door was unlocked as well. I walked in to find a pretty typical garage, various law equipment all stored in very specific spots to make sure there was enough room left to park one of their two vehicles inside. I searched the benches and cabinets looking for anything that could be useful. I kind of expected that I would find a freezer full of extra food, similar to what my dad, but there was no freezer, sadly. There also wasn't much that I could find while I was in there. I did, however, find an adult compound bow in a camo case. That's all well and good, but it's useless unless I could find. Yes! I thought and then exclaimed mid-thought as my eyes spotted a small bundle of about 10 arrows sitting in a case over the corner of the garage. I walked over and pulled one out. No tip. Shit. I said, disappointed. I decided to grab them all anyway. Worst case scenario, I could sharpen the ends as if they were as they were. As I moved the case of arrows and slung it over my shoulder, behind it, I saw a smaller metal box. I opened it. Fuck yeah! The box had large razor blade broadheads for deer hunting in it. Now I had a form of projectile weapon to protect my family. I gathered my newfound treasures and walked back out of my neighbor's garage, dropped the bag with the arrows' heads and the bow over the fence in our backyard. I crept into the basement door, and it let out a soft whine as I opened it and walked down the steps into the basement. As I got to the bottom of the steps, I heard an odd clicking, somewhat sporadic. I thought it may be the house itself creaking, still holding my makeshift spear in my backpack I was planning on using to haul whatever food I could find back to our house. Luckily, even though I couldn't find a freezer in the garage, I did find one in the basement. I walked over and pulled open the lid. It was only about half full, but It was more than enough to get us a few more weeks, if needed as far as meat goes. I loaded a good amount into my backpack and left the rest thinking I could come back later if needed. The power was still working perfectly, so I saw no problem leaving the rest of the meat safely in the working freezer. I thought I should check the rest of the house for more non-perishables and probably some evidence that my neighbors had been out of town during the beginning of this. As I walked to the steps up to the first floor, I noticed two very unsettling things. The first being an all too familiar smell of rotten meat. I really hope they just left burgers on the table and let them go bad. I thought to myself, knowing deep down there was probably no way that was truly the case. The other thing I noticed that some of the fog seemed to be inside the house. I hadn't seen it obviously being in the basement, but as I got to the steps of the first floor, it became much more obvious. I climbed the steps cautiously and quietly, slowly moved around the house until I found the pantry. I filled the rest of my bag with as many useful cans of food as I could. The bag getting heavy, I was ready to leave when I heard it. Something moving upstairs. Shit, they must be home. But why didn't they answer me? I thought, setting my bag by the basement steps and moving to the front of the house, still holding my knife on a stick. As I got to the living room, I realized something was very off. The big picture window in the living room had been smashed, glass lay all over the hardwood floor, meaning something had broken in instead of out. This was the reason all the fog had been able to pour into his house. As I made my way past the glass to steps leading upstairs, the smell kept increasing, becoming more and more nauseating. I crept up the steps, my blade leading the way. Doorways on either side of a narrow hall met me as I reached the top of the steps. I moved slowly, as if to be silent as I could, and moved my way down the hall. First bedroom door, empty. Typical child's bedroom. Room across the hall, again, empty. Home office, but it had been turned upside down, destroyed. Further down the hall I moved. Third room. I froze. It was a bathroom. On the floor lay Eric's wife, looking like she had been dead for days now. Hovered above her was one of those creatures, doing what looked like sniffing at the body, using the slits in front of its face. Suddenly, its pure white eyes split vertically in the middle and separated as if they were eyelids from some reptile, revealing holes in its face where before I'd merely assumed that they were its eyes, simply based on what were located on its head. From the holes came two praying mantis-like arms, reared back towards its horns and plunged into the dead body lying beneath the creature. It made its clicking noise again as it fed on the corpse. The protrusions from the front of its face had been hollow because it had looked like the creature was drinking her from inside, using them like demonic flesh straws. I began to step away as I saw the creature open the gills from its ribs and release more of the purple fog into the air. Then the floorboards creaked. The creature ripped its flesh straws out of the corpse and turned its head to me. My eyes widened and the only thoughts screaming through my skull were, "Oh shit." The creature let out its piercing screech, causing my ears to hurt, my bones to vibrate. It lunged at me, dark talons flying towards my face. I fell back, raising my makeshift spear up as I fell. The creature's talons ripped into my shoulders, both front and back, as its weird hands clasped around my arms. The blade of the spear stabbed into the creature's chest, but didn't plunge very deep before the duct tape was left just holding a dowel rod. Pinned on the ground by the creature, it moved its head closer to mine, struck at me with the needles coming from my eyes. They both made a thud and splinters flew up. I just had enough movement to dodge, and after they made contact with the floor behind my head, It clicked at me ominously as it reared up for another strike. The creature surprisingly wasn't very heavy, so I took a split second as it reared to move my arms and throw it back away from me. As I threw it, I tried to strike it again, hitting but nothing but air as it flew back. The claws ripped from my shoulders as it flew through the air away from me. It landed back on its hands and feet and immediately jumped at me again. As it came at me, I lifted my legs, making contact with its chest. It came down on my foot, bending my legs almost as if adding pressure to the spring. Just before it went to kick away, I reached up and grasped my handles of my knife still embedded in its chest. I kicked the beast away and off to the side, trying to aim into a room, hoping to close the door behind it and run. As I kicked it away with my hand on my knife, I pulled it from the beast's chest. It almost made it through the door, but it had hit sideways and dropped to the floor just by the side of the door frame. I just had enough time to scramble to my feet, and as I did, it immediately lunged at my face again. I ducked just in time and slammed the knife into its rib just as its gills were. At the time, I buried the knife all the way, and the creature shuddered and let out an excruciating screech, letting me know that I'd heard it. I didn't leave the knife in this time. As I backed away from it, I pulled the knife with me after I truly heard it, to slow down its attacks to become more melodic. With my other hand, I grabbed the dowel rod from the floor. Now having a knife and a club, I felt I might be actually able to win this fight. My shoulder burned with pain from its talons having whipped through my flesh. I swung the club and it backed up for a split second and lunged at me as I finished my swing. I stepped and pressured myself against the wall on the hallway as an attempt to dodge, which worked for the most part. I still caught a talon in my hip. I spun around and swung the knife blindly, lucky me making contact and chopping off one of its face needles and half of the other all in one swing. This clearly did some major damage to it, because without those it seemed to lose any form of coordination. It began stumbling and tripping over its own feet. Its attacks became very sorry attempts. This made it very easy for it to lunge in and drive the knife directly into the slits in its head. As the knife drove into the creature, it almost instantly went limp. As it lay on the floor, finally lifeless, its gills opened up again and released a large amount of purple fog into the air. As I saw this, I quickly made my way back downstairs, grabbed my bag, went down to the basement, past the freezer, out the back door. I hurried, put all caution about being quiet aside, tossing the bag over the fence as well as the dowel rod and knife. I moved a few feet down the fence before I climbed over because I fell and really didn't want to fall on the knife. I was already in enough pain and I didn't want to add to it. I grabbed all my bags, my shoulder and hip hurting especially with all of the extra weight. I carried it all the way back to the back door where Grace was waiting for me and opened the door as I got close. As I came through the door, I dropped my bag and embraced my wife in a hug, letting her know that shit had been crazy, but it'd be okay and that I love her very much. And then I collapsed on the kitchen floor exhausted. Grace moved all the bags and did her best to drag my passed out body into the bathroom, stripping me down and laying me flat on the floor while I remained passed out. She cleaned and sterilized my wounds. She then grabbed first aid kits from around the house and a small sewing kit. And with needle and thread and limited knowledge about how to make medical stitches, she used her phone to play a few tutorial videos on YouTube while she followed along and sewed me up the best she could. She then wrapped bandages and gauze over her work, made me comfortable, and let me sleep. I woke up in pain around midnight, forced myself to get up off the floor, looked in the mirror and the medical treatments I had received. I took some ibuprofen and made my way upstairs to the bed where my family were. I woke Grace as I walked into the room. I kissed her and told her thank you. I lied down next to her and fell back into a deep sleep. So guys, that was chapter 2 and 3 of My Tiny Town Just Got Put on Lockdown. If you did enjoy, leave a like and subscribe. And remember to check out the original creator of this, Cryptic Nightmares. His Reddit will be in the description. And also check out the original books that are on Amazon. Remember, there are two. My Tiny Town just got put on lockdown, and My Tiny Town just got put on lockdown, Searching for a Way Out. Those two books are on Amazon. Both links will be in the description, and you can read the book for yourself, and you don't have to wait for me to do it for you. But again, if you guys did enjoy, leave a like and subscribe. Check out Cryptic Nightmares on Reddit, and I shall see you all in the next video. Stay scary.